I'm Paige, she, her. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm an EWOC volunteer, and I'm also on the Writers Guild of America's Nonfiction Organizing Committee. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the strike and the pattern of demands, everything that has been going on so far. And then I'm going to be talking to Adam Conover in a moment. So Adam, just hold on one second while I do a quick summary for everybody about the strike. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all, just basic background of the strike. So the Writers Guild of America represents over 11,000 writers in the entertainment industry. This strike is particularly centered around something called a minimum basic agreement, which is what writers have with the studios, otherwise known as the AMPTP. Over 9,000 people voted to strike. The strike started on May 2nd, 12:01 a.m. And the pattern of demands, which is what the writers came up with together to present to the AMPTP, really centered around two buckets. The biggest one and the first one is around industrial changes to writing and filmmaking under streaming. So one important aspect of that is something called residuals, which, just for the purposes of explaining to y'all, is basically like royalties. In traditional broadcast TV, there was a set amount of money that you would make as a writer when your program was bought for syndication or when it was on reruns. And streaming has really changed the dynamic for how much a writer gets from that, how much gets paid into your pension plan, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something that the writers wanted to organize around. And then the second industrial concern around streaming that has been a huge part of the campaign is something called a mini room. So writers are now employed for shorter and shorter times. Fewer and fewer writers are employed in these writing rooms when they do happen for streaming shows. In addition to these compensation and residual buckets, there's also obviously strengthening regulations or even beginning to regulate artificial intelligence in the writer's room. That's been covered a lot in the press, but as part of the pattern of demands that the writers came up together this year. I can drop this in the chat for everyone. These are the demands that the WGA put forward for the AMPTP, which is the studios. They're pretty understandable. And as you can see, quite often the studios just rejected the proposals and refused to make a counter offer. So since May 2nd, the writers on the minimum basic agreement have been on strike. And I'm really excited to talk to you all today with Adam Conover, who is a writer, comedian, and television host. He created Adam Ruins Everything and The G Word. He's also on the Writers Guild of America West Board of Directors and on the negotiating committee. So give it up for Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paige, and thanks to all you folks. The work you do is so inspiring to all of us in the labor movement, and so I'm so excited to be here.
Yay, thank you for being here, Adam. So
Yeah.
I just have a couple quick questions for you.
Sure.
And hopefully I won't be too verbose with them, so other folks who have questions can ask you at the end of the call. But the first question I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is at stake with this strike?
I mean, look, and I apologize if I sound soundbitey because I've been doing a lot of press. But you teed me up perfectly for like my main soundbite, which is that what's at stake is the survival of our profession as a middle class career or a career at all. The companies are trying to put all entertainment workers on essentially a gig model. And look, to give you a little context. This has been a overwhelmingly unionized industry for almost 100 years. The Writers Guild just celebrated our 90th anniversary. And as a result, that's why people think of television and film writing and acting as being good professions at all. We sometimes get this, all those Hollywood writers, they're all so rich. Where does that stereotype come from? It comes from the fact that we've been a strong union town for 100 years, just like we think of it, auto workers in the 70s as making good livings, right? And the companies are trying to destroy that and put us onto a gig model. So some examples of that is they're trying to eliminate the writers' room, which is a structure that's protected writers for decades, but has never been in our contract. It's always just been a norm that the companies have started trying to erode and kill. Actually, that's the best way to frame, I think, a lot of what they're doing. They are using loopholes in our contract to end things that were previously norms, and we're having to go in and say, no, that has to be in our contract now. A lot of that is also the transition to streaming. A lot of hay has been made about, oh, the streaming model, that's the problem. The problem isn't the technology. The problem is that we don't have contract terms under streaming, and so they're making us fight to get the same protections in streaming that we've had on regular television for many years. So just to give you one little example here, this is for me personally, okay? I work in a sector of our contract called comedy variety. It's under what's called Appendix A. It's basically a side letter of our contract, and that covers everything from late night, daytime writing, like your Drew Barrymore, Ellen type of show, and then also soap operas. So, but everyone I know works in late night because I'm a stand-up comedian. That's sort of my world of writing. And so what we've had there for decades is, you have a minimum weekly pay. You have 13-week guarantee. Every time you're hired, you can only be fired 13 weeks later, which is a pretty short term of employment, but at the very least, it's a guarantee. And then we've had residuals, a particular residual formula that reflected the fact that we all work on the scripts collaboratively and no one gets paid separate script fees, right? We've had none of those terms in streaming. So when I went from making a show on the smallest basic cable channel to Netflix, right, the largest platform in the world, I was told by the executive producers, we can do whatever we want with writers. We don't have to pay them a minimum fee. We could hire and fire them by the day. And they talked about this like it was a good thing, so one of our proposals is, hey, we just want those same protections that we've had in linear, what we call linear, that's broadcast and cable, for 70 years. We want those in streaming. And what the companies came back with was, no, you can have a minimum rate, but we want it to be a day rate. We want to be able to hire and fire you by the day. We want that codified into your contract. If we were to allow that, late night television writing, which currently is one of the only stable jobs a stand-up comic like me can get. This was what, when I was coming up in New York, that's what everyone was trying to do, was get a job on John Oliver or, The Daily Show or whatever, or on Colbert. It would go from being a career to being a gig that you do in between comedy club jobs, right? And that would it would just end this type of writing as a career. There's also issues that screenwriters face, people who write movies, that I could get into, but that's the sort of general pattern. Is this norm erosion and trying to stop them from gigifying our work.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great summary. When you're thinking about how this strike has been organized, how have the rank and file members of the WGA helped steer the direction of the strike and empower the strike?
So a couple things there. First of all, the Writers Guild is an intensely democratic union. We, and I, as a member of leadership, I've seen it firsthand. And I got into leadership because I went to meetings and I was inspired by it and sort of got sucked into the process. First of all, our proposals come from reading survey responses from all of our members. And then we test out those proposals at our meetings. And our meetings are, we rent out a ballroom, we fill it with 1,000 writers, we give a presentation, and then we sit and listen to every single writer coming up on the mic. People, it's an open mic. We'll sit there for 3 hours and listen to those forever, right? So we're intensely getting member feedback all the time, which is unique among the Hollywood unions. We really strive for a lot of transparency. We are taking our cue from the membership. I mean, what we've seen over the last couple of years is members saying, I can't make a living anymore. My residuals have plummeted, but also when I get a job, it's only for, 8 weeks when it used to be, 8 months. And, writing, one of the big problems is people go a long time between jobs. You can go a year and a half between jobs. That's why residuals are so important. And that's why the weekly pay is pretty high, because it makes up for all that time when you're not working. Because it is in some ways a freelance economy. We test the proposals against the membership. There have been proposals that we've dropped or that we have reframed because we're like, oh, the membership doesn't like this, let's go this way instead. So it's constantly a back and forth and a dialogue between us and the membership. In the strike scenario, now we're all in it together, right? And so the people who are powering our strike, for instance, are our strike captains, who are volunteers so we have strike captains and lot coordinators. These are volunteer writers who spend really a full workday just making sure our picket lines run smoothly. And this is, in many ways, our next generation of leaders. These people are now getting more and more involved. They are thinking about policy. They're coming up with their own talking points that then we in leadership start hear from them and start repeating. And so it's become like, most of the time us in leadership are the only ones who are thinking about the guild for 10 or 20 hours a week, and everyone else is just writing and occasionally thinks about the guild. Right now, we have this incredible group mind where just everyone is talking and thinking about it at all times, and it's really cool. I'm sorry, I tend to be too verbose. I'll shut up and let you get to your next question.
No, that was great. Also, shout out to Strike Captain at the Disney lot, Caitlin, who's great. If you ever see her, she rules.
I will. Is she on this call? Or you just know her?
No, I'm just saying. Which actually
I'm gonna say hi to her.
Which kind of leads into my next question, which is I'm on the WGA Nonfiction Organizing Committee. Some folks might not know the WGA also represents folks that are not on the minimum basic agreement. And for those of us in the nonfiction industry, in nonfiction and the entertainment industry, as well as folks in the animation guild and the music supervisors, all of these under-organized sections of the entertainment industry or sections that are looking for union recognition or looking for industry-wide contracts, we have been asking ourselves, how can this strike both effectively agitate for our union recognition, and how can your examples steer our campaigns?
So the campaigns that folks like you and the music supervisors and the post supervisors and oh God, there's another group I'm forgetting of folks that I talk to who are trying to unionize now. You are doing the hardest work, right? And the work that all of you here are doing on this committee this is the hard work. I am really recognize that I'm in such a privileged position as a union member and a union leader because people did the hard work 90 years ago when they started the union and then kept it going for all those periods of time. And we have an incredibly functional leadership group. We have an incredibly functional democracy. It's like, we are able to operate on consensus most of the time because everyone's so, good. We have so many good unionists in the union that it's like everything runs very smoothly. Took us a lot of time to get there, right? The strike in 2007 was a lot more acrimonious because it was sort of new to us at the time. But the staff of the union spent 15 years building capacity and being ready for this day, which is why everything's going so smoothly. And then we also, by the way, are privileged in that we get a lot more press than almost any other union in America. Like, it is staggering how many reporters want to talk to me every single day. And that's a position of privilege to be in, right? But I think that a couple of things there. I really hope that we're leading by example, because we are a real old-fashioned democratic member-powered union that is, we are standing between the industrialists, the capitalists, and their dollar, by withholding our labor. We're doing it we're not going to Sacramento. We're not trying to raise awareness. We're not trying to do a symbolic strike. We are withholding our labor and starving them of money until they come to the table. And we're doing it transparently and democratically. And I do think that is hopefully trickling to other unions. That's why we have folks like music supervisors on our line. And it's really a very cool thing that right now you are seeing all of these ununionized or underunionized segments of the entertainment industry. You're seeing those folks step up and say, where's our fucking union? So music supervisors and post supervisors are two very important groups in the post-production process. The post supervisors are the people who literally deliver the final video to the network. They say, okay, here's your 4K master. That's all right. Those people don't have a union. They're not in IA 700, I think, or 800.
Yeah, it's MPEG local 700. Yeah.
700. I'm still learning my IA numbers. It's like the local. I talk to IA people and they're like, I'm 735. And I'm like, you got to tell me what that is. I don't know. There's a lot of numbers. But so they are, those folks, the music supervisors, they are trying to either join IA or start their own union. The choreographers right now, I know choreographers who are organizing, they are trying to start a union the old fashioned way. They are literally trying to start a choreographers guild they don't have a parent union of any kind that's helping them do it. They're doing it from scratch, which is the hard way, but is also incredibly fucking inspiring. So how to do it? I mean, I wish I had the direct experience doing it, right? I'm really grateful that our picket line is a place that those folks are coming to and, finding that solidarity in and growing their solidarity and growing their media presence. We've had music supervisors on our line at the Netflix lot every single day. And I think that the rising tide of union sentiment in town is hopefully going to make it easier on everybody, that when those unions come around, and look, something we're trying to do is prove to the tech companies and the new CEOs that, hold on a second, you guys forgot the unions are a power in this town. We have been for 90 years. We're going to be here for a long time. You have to take our fucking phone call, right? Here we come. Knock, knock, knock. Open the door. Buckle the fuck up, right? I'm, for instance, working with a bunch of folks on I shouldn't say what show because they're not public, but a very prominent comedy variety show that is non-union, and they're trying to flip that show. And I'm like, look, at the end of the day, this company has to feel like the Writers Guild is coming for you, and we're not backing down. And that's part of what the strike is about, is reminding the entire town we are powerful, so that hopefully when the music supervisors or nonfiction comes and knocks in the same way, they're going to know that, oh my God, these people can beat us unless we play ball. And then I think beyond that, like, something that I've really taken from this process is that nothing beats old-fashioned organizing, right? It's that is all there is to it. And so the folks in the Choreographers Guild, they are just emailing every choreographer. They're making their map. How many are there, right? There's got to be less than 1,000, right? And you get 50 people together, you can make a map of all of them. You get all those people together, and if they're able to put together a strike, then you have something, right? And I think that is what founded all of these guilds in the first place, and that is what's going to found the new ones. And building those connections with the rest of labor. I think it's very smart that everybody is showing up on our picket line and introducing themselves to our leadership, because once our strike is over, we're going to be in a position to help put work in to help other workers. Yeah.
I love to hear that from the WGA Nonfiction Organizing Committee. We love to hear that. Thank you, Adam.
That is, by the way, nonfiction organizing. I ran on that when I ran for board.
Hell yeah, let's go.
And it's unfortunately the strike is taking all of my time, but reality, documentary, those programs have writers, and those people should be in our union, and that's something that I'm very invested in fighting for.
Yay, we love to hear it. Thank you, Adam. Speaking of sort of how these unions work together in town, how do you think industrially positioning this strike within the DGA and SAG contract negotiations, how do you think that's impacting the WGA and the workers?
You mean the fact that the way that the AMPTP has scheduled the DGA and SAG-AFTRA to go before us, or to go in the middle of our strike? I mean, look, that has been their MO since the 80s. Okay, you want a little bit of history? Here's the real history. Like this is the history that nobody knows and nobody talks about. This is like in the Writers Guild, this is like the history that we tell each other, but is not really publicly known because no reporters write about this shit. No historians really know it. Okay. So up until the 80s, we basically negotiated with all the unions, negotiated with all the studios separately. So you could whipsaw them, right? You go get a deal at one studio and then you can impose it on the next deal, on the next studio. So we would use pattern bargaining against them, right? So there was this guy named Nick Counter who ran the AMPTP, and he basically reformed the organization and turned it into a labor outsourcing organization that he got every studio and network to outsource their labor negotiations to him. And what he was able to do was turn pattern bargaining against the unions. And so he would say, okay, I'm going to make a deal with the weakest union first. You can decide which one you think that is, but I think read the news. We'll impose it on the weakest, most company-friendly union first, and then we can impose that deal on everybody else because they say, well, these people took it, why don't you take it, right? Simultaneously, they also did a lot of sort of under-the-table propaganda and PR to convince people that strikes never work, they always fail. And also in the 80s, the Writers Guild had two failed strikes. We had a failed strike in 80 and I think 88. And the result of that was the Writers Guild ended up with a more conservative leadership for about 20 years. That wasn't really a member powered leadership. It was a more company friendly, hey, let's just cut a nice deal because we're producers too kind of deal. And so that became the new regime. And the woman who currently runs the AMPTP, Carol Lombardini, is Nick Counter's protege. So this guy is like the Ronald Reagan of Hollywood labor. Like he's the guy who did the regime change, right? And it's his world that we live in today. So what does that mean? The Writers Guild is now the only guild or has been for the past couple of decades that is militant at all, right? That wields a strike threat. That is the one thing that we do that nobody else has historically done. And so what does the AMPTP do? Sorry?
IATSE a little bit, but
IATSE a little bit. Yes. They took a strike vote 2 years ago or so. But that was like a shock to everybody because they had been a company friendly union. I mean, look at IATSE's history. A lot of their locals were founded as union busting unions, as company unions. And so that's been a big part of their history for a long time. And so that was like a shock. Let me tell you, all the old heads at the Writers Guild were shocked. They were like, no way they'll ever do it. So the Writers Guild is the militant union that wields a strike threat. So what does the AMPTP do? They tell everybody, oh, the Writers Guild loves to go on strike all the time. They're just a bunch of wacko crazies. So every time they go on strike, here's what we do. We hold them off. Then we go negotiate with DGA and SAG. We make a deal, and then we impose that on the Writers Guild. And so basically everyone is prepped, right? They've told Ted Sarandos and David Zaslav, don't worry about it. The Writers Guild is going to go on strike. Just plan to be stopped down for 3 months. We'll negotiate with those other two unions, and then you'll get your writers back in August or September or whatever it is, right? They've got a timeline in their heads. Couple things are fucking up that plan for them. First of all, everybody knows the plan so well. Our membership is completely inoculated. So our membership went into the strike thinking, like, everyone was like, the last strike was 100 days. This one will be at least that long. So people are in there knowing we're going to be here in the summer. So we have not bled support at all. We have like a few less people on our picket lines. It's not the party it was for the first 2 weeks, but like people are doing themed pickets. I mean, I was at Netflix. We had a Mad Men themed picket, and like people came dressed up. Like Christina Hendricks was there. It was like raucous. Yesterday,
singles pickets is hopping. Those singles pickets are doing well.
Singles picket, people are fucking on the picket line, and we got excuse me, and yesterday something like 300 Animation Guild members showed up to, I think, Warner Brothers. So that kind of shit is happening every single day, and people are but people are ready for the timeline, and our members know it's existential. So we're not bleeding support, right? The other thing is the DGA and SAG's issues don't pattern to us. They're fighting for different things. And the last thing is the pattern only matters if you believe that it matters. So in 2007, we had a much more fractious guild. And what happened was the big thing we were fighting for was coverage of the internet, right? Residuals and just jurisdiction over it. So the DGA goes in, the AMPTP gives it to them with a substandard formula. And then our members started going, some of our powerful, maybe a little bit more, Republican leaning type members, right? Started going, let's just take the DGA deal. Why don't we just take the deal? That's what we wanted. And, we had our leadership going, let's hold out for a little while longer. No, take the deal right now. And if you don't, we'll go FICOR and we'll go back to work, right? And that's kind of the conditions under which the strike ended. We got our big demand, but there was like that undermining, right? It successfully worked against us. That's not happening this year because it doesn't pattern to us. Like no one is coming to us. The DGA signed their deal a week ago. Nobody is coming to us going, take the DGA deal, because what deal would we take? It's not our issues. Our issues are the writer's room. And the DGA got the blowback for taking a deal that we got for being on strike in 2008. So the fundamentals, I'll say we're better prepared. The fundamentals are more in our favor in terms of the mood of the time. And we've been there before. So yeah, so I'm going on and on. Please jump in anytime.
No, you're doing great. We're honestly on our last question, which is probably the most important question, which is, what would you ask of people to do in solidarity right now as individuals and as unions, specifically folks who are not in the entertainment industry and folks in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just say my last thing. I'm sorry, on your last point, because what I was just describing was, it's this meta strategy that these anti-labor, frankly, geniuses at the AMPTP figured out to depress the power of labor long term. These are long-term thinkers, and it worked, and it has worked for decades. And I believe we are beating them again with organizing, with communicating with our membership, talking to our membership, inoculating them, and responding to their issues. And frankly, they ended up pushing us so hard that our members are so furious they know it's existential this year. So even in the face of that, I think organizing beats them, as a wrap up to that. So how can people help? First of all, bodies on our picket line are always incredibly appreciated. Whether that's New York, LA. We're also doing location-based pickets in Atlanta, New Mexico, places like that. Those, I think, though, are only limited to Writers Guild members because they're a little bit more sensitive. Oh, and let me shout out, by the way, that we have a big difference between this and 2007 is we have shut down almost all productions in LA, New York, and across the country by picketing. But specifically, it's because Teamster and IATSE members are respecting our picket line, right? And so they are the ones shutting down the shows. All we do is put the picket line up. They're the ones who choose not to cross. And their leadership and their membership their rank and file are honoring our picket lines. And that is something that nobody expected. That was like the first big surprise. Because in 2008, IATSE came out publicly against the strike. They were like, why are you doing this? They were, shit talking us in the press. It got very acrimonious. And this year they are literally honoring our picket lines. And you better believe that if they go on strike next year, we'll be there with them. But look, a lot of our picket lines are just, we're trying to keep them full because it feels good and it looks good to have them full. So if you can come out to a line in LA or New York, we're always extremely happy to have you. If you are somewhere else, honestly, and you're in a position to donate any money, there's a fund called the Entertainment Community Fund. It's a fund that's existed for about 100 years, formerly known as the Actors Fund. And they give grants to folks experiencing, financial hardship in the entertainment industry at any time, but particularly right now. We raised over $1 million. It might have been up to 2 million just from Writers Guild members alone for that fund. My understanding is they've already blown through it because they're giving out, $10,000 grants to folks who are experiencing hardship. And so that is like, I know there's sometimes a little bit of skepticism in lefty circles about big nonprofits. This is like basically an institutionalized mutual aid fund. The money comes in and they send it right back out to people who need it. So I really recommend, donating any money there, or if you want to do a little mini fundraiser or anything like that, Entertainment Community Fund. They're really awesome. And those are the big things, and spreading our message as wide and as far as you can, and letting folks know that you're with us.
One thing too I want to highlight is the fact, you recognize, Adam, like the press coverage you get, that sort of thing too, and that you do have a militant Democratic Union. But I just want to mention that what you're doing with that platform is incredible, and I think what we see happening in your industry is happening everywhere, where it's the gigification of work, it's the de-skilling of work, and so a lot of the fights that you're having now are fights that we're all going to experience. So just being able to see you use that platform to bring people into the labor movement and show them what can happen with a democratic militant union, y'all are doing it. And, that's incredible. It's inspiring. And just seeing WGA on the news, right? People are talking about strikes. People are talking about labor organizing. People are hungry and fed up with the bullshit. So thanks for helping to light that fire and keep it moving, because we're hungry and we ain't going to stop.
I'm so happy that we can be part of that story. Last year we were so inspired by, in our union, the Starbucks story, right? The Amazon story, and what those workers did. And, one of the most important things about that, frankly, is the headlines, right? It's the vibe. It's the hot labor summer, it's it's memeified, but it's real. And I'm really happy that we can be part of that story and be that really visibly. And again, we're a privileged union. We're one of the last big, powerful, member-led, democratic militant unions in America that can wield this kind of power over our industry, because we have held it really strongly for decades and decades. But we shouldn't be the only one. And part of our work is to further it. everybody, like our staff are some of the most like some of the most intensive militant unionists you've ever met. Like they're like, we are a true labor movement organization. So I'm very happy that we're able to do that. And, it's going to be a big part of my work once we're out of this strike is to do all that we can to, extend that solidarity to as many workers as we can. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone has to organize their own workplace, right? Like you can never fight someone else's battle for them, but like, I wouldn't be doing this if it was just for us. So.
No, very much appreciated. And I've said it before too, but no one's coming to save us. We got to do it ourselves, and that's what we're doing here together. So it's really appreciate y'all.
I'm answering one more question in the chat really quick.
Please do.
Okay. You want me to just say it?
Yeah.
Okay, here's what I wanted to say, because I'm sorry to tag this on at the end, but I'm really passionate about this. Someone asked if IATSE members and Teamsters are violating their contract by respecting our picket line. It's about no strike clauses, right? And so there's a lot of confusion about no strike clauses. Even if a union has a no strike clause, which says they won't go on strike while they're under a contract, so they can't, like do a sympathy strike, right? It's still every worker's individual right under labor law to respect a picket line, no matter what your contract says. So you always have that right. And what a militant progressive union will do is it will say, we cannot call a sympathy strike, but we certainly encourage all of our members to use their individual right to not cross a picket line in solidarity with this union. And so Teamsters and IA, a lot of people say Teamsters have a really great no strike clause where that allows them to do this. They do have better language than other unions, but IAA doesn't have that language. IATSE doesn't have that language. Their members are simply choosing en masse to honor our picket lines. And so there's been some other unions that have said, oh, we can't do that because we have a bad no strike clause. It's bullshit, all right? Because it's a loophole in labor law that is in our favor, where you always have the right to respect a picket line, and every union has the ability to at least not dissuade their members from crossing a picket line, or from respecting a picket line. So I just want to make that really clear, because there's a huge amount of confusion about it. And I think rather than focusing on no strike clauses, we should just be saying every worker has the right to honor a picket line, and we encourage you to use it. Thanks. And thank all you guys. You got the work you do is incredible, and I'm so grateful to be here. And hope I see you out there.